So welcome. Today we're at destination number 1. We're in the town of Exeter, Rhode Island. Very quaint and historical rural community here in the Ocean State. And specifically we're at Chesnut Hill Baptist Church. As I pan over, you can see the cute little white building that comprises the church there. Missing the top of the church there, you can see at the very top right there. Adjacent to it is old historical cemetery number 22. As the motorcycle goes by us, this is going to be the location of our first visit, the actual cemetery adjacent to the Baptist church. So the legend that we're going to investigate today is that of Mercy Brown, generally regarded as the last vampire of Rhode Island. Now, the history behind this rather macabre appellation is more interesting than the supernatural element of it. So we'll just talk about the history, what the facts are of the case. And as we walk towards the resting place of the Brown family, I'll fill in the details. So, what was happening in the 18th and 19th century, one of the most major causes of death at that time was a disease known as consumption. It is commonly known today as tuberculosis, and its symptoms involved general fatigue, fluid in the lungs, coughing up of blood. It was a wasting illness. Skin grew pale, your eyes grew red, and it literally just choked you to death. It really just tore the life out of you. Tuberculosis is, of course, caused by bacterial infection and has claimed the life of people throughout the ages. Some very famous people: Jean O'Neill, Eleanor Roosevelt, Erwin Schrödinger, and just a long list of very creative and productive human beings. It's generally regarded as one of the 3 poverty illnesses that exist in the world, next to AIDS and malaria. So we're standing here. This is the Brown family plot, and I'll pan over here, and you can see the entire family that lived in Exeter during, in the years that we're going to be looking at here, the mid to late 19th century. So George Brown was the father of this unfortunate, tragic-stricken family. You can see he lived well into the 20th century. He survived the illness that would literally ravage his family. At some time in 1882, his wife, you can see her headstone right here, Mary Eliza, contracted consumption. Now, in the rural community of Exeter, they didn't really understand what tuberculosis was, what its connection to consumption was. They didn't know the origins or the treatment for it. At that time, in England, 1 out of every 4 deaths was due to consumption. So it was no surprise that the disease would once it started within a family, it would just wreak havoc through all the other members of the family. But Mary was the first to contract it, and as you can see by her stone, she died on December 8th, 1883. She died of the illness after a very short stint. A few months after she died, approximately 6 months, Mary's daughter, Mary Olive, contracted the disease. Here's Mary Olive's stone here. You can see she died June 6th, 1884, about approximately 6 months after her mother. She too had tuberculosis. Same symptoms: the red eyes, the coughing up of blood, the fatigue. Those who weren't familiar with the disease or in its origins could commonly prescribe supernatural origins to the disease. And so Mary Olive didn't last very long. She had the disease for just a matter of weeks before she succumbed to it, and she was buried here in historical cemetery number 22. Now, it was about 9 years later, 8.5 to 9 years later, where Mary's sister Mercy Brown began to show the same symptoms. The disease was spreading through Exeter. These 2 girls weren't the only ones who were afflicted with it, but Mercy Brown began to become symptomatic at the end of 1891, and within a few short weeks, she too succumbed to the dreaded disease. And You can see from when she was buried, you know, she died January 17th, 1892, so she died in the middle of winter time. So the ground was actually frozen during this period of time. And they couldn't bury her right away. They had to keep her body in what was known as a keep. And we'll take a short walk over to the keep in a second. One thing I want to point out here, without disturbing George Brown's grave, is the quaint little floral arrangement and attention that Miss Brown is getting even well after her death, more than 100 years, 120 years after she died. Now Mercy had a brother. His name was Edwin. So after Mercy died, Edwin came down with the disease. And it's hard to read here. So you can see Edwin Brown. If I trace it out, you can see he died in May 3rd of 1892. He was 21 years old. He was the only son of George Brown. As soon as Edwin became stricken with the disease, people in the town of Exeter began to suspect that there perhaps were supernatural elements at play here. Mother, 2 daughters, and a son all contracted the disease. Same symptoms, very suspicious symptoms in that they resembled those that were commonly attributed to vampirism. The legends of vampirism had started in Europe, specifically Eastern Europe, and had spread as legends tend to do across the sea, across the pond, and they came even here to rural Rhode Island. And so people were very much aware of the effect of the devil and effect of supernatural spirits. So town folk began to immediately suspect that a vampire was at play here. Literally, the way the vampire was defined at that time, it was a spirit which rose from the grave and visited loved ones and would literally drain the life out of them. It was a little different than the picture that we attribute to vampires today as being these beings that walk around, sleep in a coffin at night, and visit their victims while they're sleeping and leave bite marks in their neck. The vampires of the 19th century were generally regarded as spirits which would visit relatives and friends, and what they would do is literally just drain the life out of their victims. So it was with Edwin's illness that the townspeople began to suspect that there may be more than just a simple disease that was the cause of all of these deaths. And it was specifically with the Brown family that they suspected this. And you can see here that somebody has left a note here, a legend tripper note. We of course are visiting some of the legends of around the state, around New England. And this person wants to point out that Mercy was no vampire, and that she and her family fell victim to 2 monsters, tuberculosis and hysteria. And we'll talk about the hysteria and what happened at the time. Okay, so when Edwin was diagnosed, the town began to suffer from this hysteria. And they immediately asked the Brown family and the town to exhume the bodies of the afflicted women, Mary, Mary Olive, and Mercy. Mercy's body was still in the keep, and we'll visit the keep here in a second. So they immediately dug up the bodies of Mary and Mary Olive. Now George Brown was against this. He didn't believe in vampirism at all. He thought this was just superstitious silliness, and he opposed it. But townspeople were very adamant, and he eventually agreed. And Mary Eliza and Mary Olive were pulled out of the earth, and their bodies were examined. Checking my notes here, the doctor in charge of the entire procedure is a rather interesting fellow, Dr. Metcalf, an individual who should have known better. He had a very advanced degree in medicine, but he presided over the examinations of both Mary Eliza and Mary Olive, and when they were pulled out of the ground, they showed the normal signs of decomposition. Mercy, however, had to be pulled out of a completely different location. Let's take a walk over to where that was. Now, as we said, Mercy died in January of 1883, and because the ground was frozen, she she had to be placed in what is known as the keep, which is an above-ground crypt where her body could be stored in relative repose until the ground thawed and they could inter her into the ground. So we'll walk over there. Well, this type of hysteria that gripped Exeter wasn't limited to just this area. As we'll see later, we'll go to the second site, cemetery number 14, was another case, one of the earliest cases of vampire hysteria. So this is the keep that Mercy Brown was kept in. We can try to take a look inside. I believe it's bricked up. I was looking here earlier. Can't really see. There's the latch. So this is where the bodies were stored when people had passed away in the middle of winter time. Most keeps had a little bell, inside, so in case somebody was falsely locked inside, they could ring the bell, and hopefully the crypt keeper, the cemetery keeper, would hear the bell and come and rescue that person. So Mercy was kept in this above ground keep. She wasn't buried under the ground. When Metcalf examined her, quite unsurprisingly, her body hadn't decomposed as much as her sister's. Now, time had passed, considerable amount of more time had passed between when her mother and sister died and when she died, almost 9 years. So her body, of course, hadn't decomposed at the same rate. Metcalf also noted that her hair and nails had grown, and so he determined that her degree of decomposition didn't match the amount of time that she was in the ground, and she was immediately suspected as being the family member who was caught up in this, gripped by this vampirism. I suppose the way the story should go is that she must have engaged in this while she was still living, because her mother and sister died well before her. So her spirit must have been at the mercy of some demon even up to that point. So when she was pulled out and it was determined that her body hadn't properly decomposed enough, Dr. Metcalf immediately ordered her heart and lungs removed. They were burned on a rock here in the cemetery. That object is, the location of that rock is not known to us. And her ashes were mixed with herbs and medicines, and they were fed to her brother Edwin. It was believed that this was a way of breaking the spell of the vampire and healing the afflicted. Unfortunately for Edwin, this didn't work. Edwin died March 25th, 1892. He was buried next to his sister. It was generally regarded at the time that he had progressed so far in his illness that he was unable to, the medicine was unable to take have its full effect. So Mercy Brown was the last person who was subjected to this vampire ritual of the removal of the heart and some of the organs, the burning, the mixing with the herbs as the antidote to the vampire curse. We'll just take a final look at her grave here. We'll put a rock here and a prayer for the young lady. Now, there are also other legends here. Take a look at it. Some people believe that her spirit still walks the cemetery and it's completely earthbound. The person who put this up, this may actually be the cemetery themselves, is quick to point out that this is not the case, and they ask for people to refrain from offering satanic, gothic, or vampire-related items to the grave. So this is a place, I guess, where, especially as vampires have really gripped the popular culture, this is a place where people tend to congregate and perhaps do things that are not in good taste. But nevertheless, the case of Mercy Brown is the last American vampire, definitely the last Rhode Island vampire, is a very well-known story throughout New England, and here is her grave. And